Please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Nice to see all these bright, shiny faces.
T-shirts.
We open our meeting with public comment. Anybody in the audience wishing to address the county board? And I think we have Heather Johnson that has a short presentation.
Yes, I would like the individuals that were part of the donations for the Veterans Band, if you guys would all please join me up here.
Most of the audience.
Awesome.
That's fantastic.
A month ago, when we were planning on having the individuals come and be in front of the county board, the time was an error on my part, and so I'm really excited to see the individuals present here. I do want to just briefly go through the individuals that were part of the donation, and then if any one of these individuals would like to share, I want them to have the opportunity to do that. So private community members, the American Legion Auxiliary, the Sons of the American Legion, the VFW Auxiliary, Disabled American Veterans, Elks Club, Eagles Club, the Good View Activity Group in the bright yellow, Military Order of the Purple Heart, Winona Red Man Club, Veteran for Veterans, and the Support to Troops program chose to provide financial donations as well as participate in work to raise funds to be able to purchase a second van for the veterans who are transported to different medical appointments in Toma, Minneapolis, Rochester area, and what was the fourth place? Thank you. The donations totaled over $21,000, and this exceptional giving by the public, the clubs, and the military entities represented here was essential to that purchase. And I wanted to thank them for that and present them to you.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Glenn Mueller, and I'm the Winona County Veterans President. We meet March, April, May, June, July, and August, and September and October to plan our Memorial Day, Day at the Fair, and also Veterans Day. We would like to invite you to please come to one of our meetings, any one of you or each and every one of you, so you understand what we talk about, the difference that takes place in Lewiston, St. Charles, and Winona, the communities that we make as veterans. We all strive for the same thing, to make the difference in every veteran's life there is. Got to give a big thank you to the auxiliary for the amount of money that they raised for this van, which is awesome. It's great to be able to have two vans. Like I say, I live out in St. Charles, and some of the guys there go to Rochester, some go to Toma, some go to the cities. And it's nice to be able to have a van to come on up, pick some of them up, and take them up. I consider myself good because my health is good so far, but I know some people that are in rough shape. So it's greatly appreciated. And like I say, these guys are awesome behind me. I want to thank each and every one of them. They made one great difference. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Just on behalf of the Disabled American Veterans Male Southeast chapter, we handle 9 counties across all of southeast Minnesota, Winona being one of our strong counties. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity to give us the chance to help us fulfill our mission, and that is fulfilling our promises to the men and women who served. And thanks to all my brethren and sisters. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Kelly Ellingheisen. I'm president of the Good View Activity Group, and we felt very honored and very privileged to be able to donate to something to help our veterans. It's very much something that we support, and we just want to say thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Gordy Nelson, and I'm an officer with the Winona chapter of the Military Order of the Purple Heart. And our members help donate to purchase this van, and we also have members that use this van. So we're thankful for everybody that donated, and the supply of this van for use by our disabled veterans.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mark Smith, Commander of the Lewis American Legion. We have a lot of members that use this van, and without this van possible, a lot of them wouldn't be able to get the treatment they deserve. So I'd like to thank everybody that did the donations. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I'm Diane Cada, and I'm president of the American Legion Auxiliary here in Winona, Post 9. Our fundraiser in March wasn't for the actual van because by the time we got it planned and going, the van was already being purchased. So our fundraiser was to raise money for the drivers and anything else that would not be covered by county expenses. So on behalf of, I have 3 checks here. One's from the auxiliary, one's from our post, and one's from the VFW because they were made out to Winona County Veterans Van. My treasurer didn't feel comfortable forging the signature, so that's why there's 3 different checks here, but they all came to us under our March 10th fundraiser. So I thought maybe Jerry would be here tonight. So who do I actually give the money to? We'll do it together then. I'm kidding. So on behalf on everybody and the public for attending our event and the different businesses that donated money towards us and gift certificates, we were very happy with the success of our fundraiser. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a county camera? Greg, or did
I'll
you?
just send it to Ken.
Okay, so we can,
You got a picture?
you need him to,
Great.
you got
No, I
a,
think-
are you moving?
Let's look, let's look.
See if it turned out, otherwise we'll get it.
I can take one too.
Yeah, we should have a picture to put.
I can just do one.
Have you got one, Ken?
Yeah, sure.
So maybe, can you scrunch together?
I can get it. Are you ready? Everybody say cheese. Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, now one over here too.
Yeah,
1, 2, 3. There we go. Perfect. Thanks.
all right. Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll give them a minute to.
I sent you the one I took, Ken.
Okay.
I want acknowledgement on the photography.
Do you charge royalty? Yeah.
I'll donate my royalty, but.
All right, is there anyone else in the audience wishing to address the Winona County Board? All right, seeing nobody come forward, we'll move on with item 3, approval of the Winona County Board minutes from March 13th.
So move.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Kavesi, seconded by Commissioner Pomeroy to approve the meeting minutes. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. Meeting minutes approved. Acknowledgement, number 4.1, the Economic Development Authority, October 26, 2017.
I moved.
Do them separately? Okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
no,
go
that's
ahead.
fine. Go ahead.
Or should we do them as a?
I'd say do them separately. I can't speak to 4.1, but
Okay,
I
all
know
right.
4.2
So,
and 4.3.
so motion by Commissioner Pomeroy,
To approve.
A second.
second by
Acknowledge receipt of the
See.
approved minutes. Yeah.
4.1. All right, acknowledge, and Commissioner Kavesi seconds. All those in favor of acknowledgement of economic development, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Okay, acknowledged. 4.2, Whitewater Joint Powers Board, December 21st.
I'll move to acknowledge those minutes.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Jacob, second by Commissioner Olson to acknowledge the Whitewater Joint Powers Board, December 21. Discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Approved. 4.3, Road and Bridge, November 21, 2017.
Acknowledge those minutes as well.
Second.
Okay, we have a Motion by Commissioner Jacobs, second by Commissioner Pomeroy to acknowledge the road and bridge November 21. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Approved. Thank you. Consent comments and approval of agenda items. Mr. Fritz.
I have nothing to add.
Nothing for me.
Commissioner Jacob? Is there any? Okay, I will just have one thing to put on a future agenda. Okay, with that, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second?
Motion made by Commissioner Jacob, second by Commissioner Pomeroy to approve the agenda as presented. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. Approved. Mr. Fritz, if you read that.
All right, I'll read the consent business into the record. 6.1, appoint members to the Winona County Workforce Development Board. 6.2, approve monthly resolution. 6.3, approve renewal of grant agreement with Winona Volunteer Services for the purchase of volunteer services. 6.4, approve renewal of grant agreement with Women's Resource Center for Sexual Assault Crisis Aid and Battered Women's Task Force programs. 6.5, award bid of CASAF 5 and 8 full depth reclamation and overlay to Dunn Blacktop. 6.6, approve the 2018 State of Minnesota Boat and Water Safety Grant Award Agreement. 6.7, approve State of Minnesota Joint Powers Agreement and Department of Public Safety Annual Plan Agreement. 6.8, approve renewal of indirect cost allocation plan agreement with Government Management Group. And 6.9, confirm payment of disbursements. That concludes the consent business.
I'd move to approve as presented.
Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Pomeroy, seconded by Commissioner Kavesi to approve the consent business as presented. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Approved. Moving on to general business. Department recommendations. 7.1, receive the Winona County Citizens Review Panel Annual Report. And I think we have a couple people in the audience. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing us this time to present to you what I've already forwarded, I believe, in a written format. But again, I think this is the third or fourth year that I've come before you as the co-chair of this group, just to kind of talk about some of the highlights in the report that I sent you. We did have, I have a couple other members with me, Tammy Stoss, who's our newest member, and we're very glad to have her with us because of her very strong background in foster care experiences, which is a real major issue for the county at this time. And also Mary Hewitt, who's probably been here longer than any of the rest of us have been here. So it's nice to have them with us tonight. I talked a little bit in this report about calling this more of a learning year for the Citizen Review Panel. And one of the reasons that I did that is there's so much happening out there right now for children and families. There are new initiatives, there's new studies, there's new information coming forth about what's presenting problems for children and families. And so we had an opportunity to participate in several learning events throughout the course of the year. Human sex trafficking is a huge issue around the state of Minnesota right now, especially in light of a new facility in Minneapolis where we're drawing larger and larger national sporting events into the community, and they seem to draw this element of human sex traffickers. In fact, there was a number of weeks of planning and months of planning in Minneapolis and St. Paul for the Super Bowl just because of the history that this carries with us. So I also included with you, just as a matter of reference, several items, handouts that talk about resources that are available throughout the state for people who are identified as victims of human sex trafficking. And again, in the past, we've always looked at these people who are involved in human sex trafficking as prostitutes, or in the case of juveniles, juvenile delinquents. And in 2017, the federal government changed our looking at that and said, these people are all victims. They're not there because they want to be there. They're not there because they're earning money or some other type of living. They're there because they're victims of sexual abuse. Another new thing that's happened at the statewide level is an approach to the Mortality Review Board. In the past, when a child has been severely injured or lost their life, the Mortality Review Board at the State Department of Human Services has responsibility for reviewing those cases. in the past, historically, not only at the local level or at the state level or at the federal level, the first thing that usually happens when we have one of those incidents is fingers start to get pointed. You didn't do your job, you didn't do the documentation, you didn't do your work, and then that flows up to the next level where the supervisor says, why didn't you oversee the paperwork, why wouldn't you oversee the report? So they get fired, the worker gets fired, and in the cases of several states that I've been working in, it even goes all the way up to the top, where the commissioner of the Department of Human Services or Children and Families ends up being replaced. They write new policies, they provide more training, and yet the real issue that happened that led to the death of the child never really gets found because all that information goes undercover. Because in the past people are worried about, I'm not going to tell what happened because I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to cover up what happened because I'm going to lose my job. I don't want my boss to lose their job. So the state is looking at a totally new thing called collaborative safety. And they're looking at it as a systemic approach to what happened in the incident. Let's not just point fingers about who did what to where. What happened in that particular case? How did it happen? What were the systemic issues that led to the death of that particular child? And how can we learn from that so that it doesn't happen again? The people that did the training on this, was a 3-day training or it was a 1-day training for those of us that were just citizens, but there's an extensive training going on at state level, actually come out of the aerospace industry. And the best example I can use is they say when a plane crashes, you don't necessarily fire the pilot or the stewardess or the guy who owns the airline. You figure out why the heck the plane went down in the first place. And that's more of a systemic issue. So it's that collaborative work that they're looking at to try to unveil a new approach to child and infant mortality issues in the state. Let's see. There was a section in here on a seminar that Mary Hewitt attended called Why Are There So Many Kids in Out-of-Home Placement? And I'd like to just talk a little bit about that now and a little later. But the issue is continuing to get worse and worse. More and more and more children are going into out-of-home placement. You can look at the numbers in Winona County. With 37 kids in out-of-home placement at the end of 2016, 70 around 70 at the end of 2017, and now there are 90 in out-of-home placement. Majority of those out-of-home placements are because of drug use and opiate use and those kinds of issues. At the statewide level and at the federal level, as a result of this, it shows that 60% of the cases reported to child protection were due to neglect issues rather than physical abuse issues. And that's always been the case. It's always had a higher percentage. But again, it's the neglect. You know, when you're using drugs, you aren't feeding the kids. Drugs are laying around the house. Kids can crawl around on the floor and pick them up, put them in their mouth, and then we have a real problem. So that was another issue that has come up. Also, in the overall concern of this thing, we're seeing the numbers change dramatically in Winona County. I don't know if many people saw an article that was in the Minneapolis, and I don't like to say it's just Winona County. It's the state. It's counties all over the state. It's at the federal level. There's an interesting article in the Star Tribune a number of weeks ago about Wright County. Wright County is quite a bit larger than Winona County is. It's located closer to the metropolitan area. But they identified 3 single issues that were resulting in their numbers going up dramatically in the last 2 years. The governor's task force came out and did all this big review and did all this big study and everything, and as a result of that, they developed a whole other set of screening guidelines. Those screening guidelines were intended to make sure that we were taking a close look at cases that came before us and decide which ones are going to be considered for investigation and which ones are not going to be considered investigations. They're much tighter, they're much stricter, they focus a lot on domestic violence and on drug abuse, and therefore numbers went up. The other thing that they saw too was that they have a younger demographic area because of their location, more people kind of moving out of the Hennepin County area down to the southwest, but they have a younger population, so they've got more younger people that are involved with the drug trafficking business going on now and that are also in need of parenting and those kinds of things. You know, they're having children, but somehow we still haven't invented that handbook for how to raise your child yet to hand out to them when those children are born. And again, they said there's an increase in drug abuse among parents, and in Wright County, the primary drug problem has been methamphetamines and not so much the opioids. But it's just a matter of that meth, and pick up the newspaper here, look at Buffalo County. All you do is you read down the Buffalo County court calendar and you see one name after another name after another name of people involved with methamphetamines. The other thing that we are very concerned about, in addition to that, is the lack of foster care homes in Winona County. Right now, there are only 8 licensed foster care homes in all of Winona County. Out of those 8 homes, we have like 60 kids that are in out-of-home placement because of drug abuse. We have 90 kids in out-of-home placement. There's only 8 foster homes. None of those foster homes are what we consider to be culturally diverse. They're all white Anglo-Saxons. So therefore, if we have children that are of Indian heritage, or of color, we try to find them a place to go where it's culturally appropriate. So they end up going outside of Winona County. Increases the cost, increases the time spent by staff having to travel to those places. And oftentimes what happens is there aren't any available places, so that some of these children end up in treatment foster care programs that are designed for children with severe problems. But some of these kids don't need a problem, but that's where the bed is, so that's where they end up. So we end up paying a whole lot more for a placement in a treatment foster care because of the level of services that are provided to children, when in fact maybe that child doesn't need that level of care. But they got to go someplace. They can't stay in the hallways of the county office building. So we're very concerned about that, and that's one of the things that we're going to work closely with the department on, is to try to work on finding ways to increase the number of licensed foster care. I know that Karen Sansness has presented to the Community Services Advisory Committee a plan that they're looking at in terms of trying to look at things that need to be done to do that and to raise the number of licensed foster care homes. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on. There's a new person at the Department of Human Services whose sole responsibility is to develop a framework for the state of Minnesota in prevention. And we hear prevention very often, but this is a real concerted effort to try to push this whole level of care for families and children upstream to the point where there's more prevention work that's being done, more accessibility to opportunities for parents and families and children so that they can prevent their problems before they come before the staff at Human Services. And finally, the one thing that I'm very concerned about, in fact, I just wrote to the 3rd Judicial District Clerk of Court's office, is the loss or potential loss of the judgeship in the 3rd Judicial District and moving that from Winona to Rochester. A lot of times when you read the articles about those things that have been written, they talk about the crimes. Well, crime's going up. We need more judges because we need more crime stuff. Well, there's all these out-of-home placement cases that are coming before the court, too. And Winona County has worked real hard through the Children's Justice Initiative to try to work out get to the point where all of these cases are caught up again, so that all of the timelines that need to be met for permanency have been accomplished. Now, the feds hold that over our head and say, you don't do it on time, you don't get the money. So that's a real critical issue that I don't want anybody to lose sight of as we talk about the need for these judgeships. If we have out-of-home placement cases going up, we need those. We need that judge time here, and then not just once a week. I'm sure Karen can talk to that as well as anybody. But I did, on behalf of the Citizens Review Panel, send some feedback to the 3rd Judicial District Clerk's office, and she's already responded and said thank you for your information. It's for what it's worth. So again, we have a number of things out there. We continue to be interested in them and working with it. It's been very nice to have Heather on board with us and provide her expertise with us as well. So thank you very much for allowing us to submit that to you. And again, we want to carry as much information as we can to support the Human Services agencies so that these children and families have an opportunity to grow and to get better. Have any questions or any comments?
No, just thank you for the work that you do. It can't be easy to deal with all those cases, and so we do thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, moving on to 7.2, discuss, approve mental health bonding resolution for the continued support of mental health services. And is Heather going to?
Well, we weren't going to present anything unless you had questions.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, Commissioner Kavesi brought this
Yeah,
attention to us last meeting.
I just think the resolution points out that what we all know is that there are gaps in the system. Some people wouldn't even call it a system, but there is a bill being addressed in the legislature for some regional behavioral health crisis facilities, crisis program facilities, which would also provide permanent supportive housing for people with behavioral health needs. So this legislation would actually address quite a few of the issues that we are seeing locally. So I just wanted to make sure that we got our voice in there. A lot of the AMC counties are doing this same type of resolution. So just addressing the gaps and bringing up the fact that there are gaps and that we're struggling to work around what we have right now. So that's what the resolution has. It's actually on page 85 of the agenda.
I'd move to adopt the resolution.
Motion made by Commissioner Pomeroy, second by Commissioner Olson to adopt the resolution. Any discussion? Just a point, this was discussed at our AMC board meeting, and more we're trying to present a united front, and there was an action asked of all 87 counties to support this resolution, and so hopefully that's what is happening.
Yeah, I'm on the Health and Human Services Committee for AMC, and we talked about this at length, so I'm pleased to bring it forward.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Approved. Okay, thank you. And that'll get forwarded on to the proper authorities at the, I think there is a House and a Senate bill
Yes.
going through, so whoever the authors are need to get a copy of our resolution in too. Okay, all right. 7.3, discuss and appoint Citizen Advisory Committee volunteers. And we still have a couple openings, but this one is for the Stockton, Rolling Stone, Minnesota City watershed. One new applicant.
I'd move to appoint Michelle Frisbee to the Stockton, Rolling Stone, Minnesota City watershed.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Pomeroy, second by Commissioner Olson to approve the applicant to the Stockton, Rolling Stone, Minnesota City watershed. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay, approved. Now, to my knowledge, that fills that particular
Yes.
committee? Okay, and we still have a extension committee, one vacancy. It's currently posted, and at the last extension meeting, they thought they had a applicant, so hopefully they're moving forward with the process. Okay, all right, thank you. 7.4, receive the monthly finance and budget update. Mr. Moga?
I'm doing a budget update, or finance and budget update for February. In February, it would be 17% of the year is completed. And if you look at the budget, everything is pretty much right around that 17% for expenses. General expenses are at 17. Human services are at 16.76. So right now for expenses, looks like things are on track for expenses. Revenues at this point are lagging, but the other thing is revenues are really based on twice a year with property taxes. We'll go to the cash flow. Starting for February, started cash in the general fund started out at $12.8 million. We had actual revenues of $312,000. Actual expenses were $1.3. Ending cash is $11.8. For the total for the year, Beginning cash started out at 14.3. Actual revenues are 570,000. Actual expenses are 3 million. Ending cash is $11.8 million. The variance this year in the general fund compared to last year is a negative 2.5 compared to a negative 2.7. Looking at the total of the funds that are being presented here, it's a negative 3.2 compared to last year of a 3.2 also. And I think it's highway, highway is kind of, there's a variance there, and also a little bit up in community services and also general fund. And it's February, so a lot of them, it's a lot to do with, there's, one-time expenses that are occurring. The other thing is the human services is running at a negative in cash because we started out the year at basically a zero, and right now we're negative 1.2 million at this point. That number is probably going to continue to grow until we actually have our first settlement in June. And then, any questions on that document? If not, we'll go to the summary budget, or summary of the cash flow. Beginning cash started at 19.6. Actual revenues were 3.3. Actual expenses were 6.5. Ending cash is 16.4. The variance is kind of the same as the previous page. So, any questions on this document? No? If not, thank you.
All right, thank you. I think everybody got their season's greetings in the mail this week. Don't forget, they were your property tax statements that came, and don't forget that there's bills in them envelopes, unfortunately. Moving on to 7.5, discuss approve resolution supporting the retention of a 3-chamber judicial seats in the Winona County District Court. Attorney Sonneman.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I've prepared an agenda item asking for your support and approval of a resolution that would be the form of a comment to the Minnesota Supreme Court. As my materials explained, there was a proposal for the soon-to-be vacant seat of our Winona County District Court because Judge Thompson's retiring in April. And there's always been pressure every time there's a vacancy in Winona County for that seat to go elsewhere in the district. The district is comprised of 11 counties, of which Winona is the 3rd largest county in the district, behind Olmsted and Rice. But for some reason, the courts are always looking at moving our seat. But historically, we've always had 3 seats. It's very stable. As was referenced in the presentation by the Citizens Review Panel, it's very important to have 3 judges, particularly as was noted by Judge Leahy in one of the community meetings that I've scheduled. Having a judge to sit on a case in vulnerable adult cases, child protection cases, juvenile delinquency cases, mental health cases, where the judge is familiar with the case is incredibly important. And what we would be left with if we lost that judgeship is a visiting or senior judge that would come in and not know what's really going on in that family, would not be familiar with, say, a young person who's before the court again in juvenile court or in child protection. So that's one area that I think people don't really think about in terms of a judge being lost here. The other, well, just the mechanical issue of it is that we have really pretty much been at a 2.8 weighted caseload for Winona County, and that's why 3 has worked. Olmsted always needs a judge, and the proposal as it stands now would take a judge from us, and it would actually have ripple effects through the rest of the district, particularly in counties where there's just one judge. Right now it works to equalize the judge work by sending judges to Olmsted County because they're set up there physically in the courthouse. I don't know if anybody's ever been in courtroom number 1 in the Olmsted County Courthouse, but that's where they have arraignments and many of the more earlier hearings in criminal cases where not a lot of substantial work gets done, and that's perfect for visiting and senior judges to handle. And that's why actually, according to Judge Leahy, Olmsted County has no performance issues. I mean, their performance numbers are steady and good. So in reality, they don't need a judge, a full-time judge there. So so the Supreme Court's opened this up for comment, which is really quite unusual. And so taking advantage of that, the CJCC, through myself and Sam Yant, who's the Houston County Attorney, because he's concerned as to how it's going to affect Houston County. We've organized and I've sent out, I don't know, hundreds of emails asking for comment, and I was glad to hear that Mr. Knight had sent that in because it's so important to hear from a diverse group of people. So with that, the resolution, well, I also want to thank Chair Ward for coming to our meeting yesterday that we had, that we invited the public and many other folks to hear about the concerns about losing the judgeship. It was, I thought, pretty well attended for something that sometimes is under the radar. So, so if you have any questions, we're asking that you support this resolution, and then it would be filed with the Supreme Court if you approved it.
Commissioner Kavesi.
I did have a question. I noticed in your letter, this is on page 97, you were questioning the possibility that the district could fund a judgeship in Rochester by the destination medical funding. And I think that's an interesting solution because obviously the population is going to increase, and you could assume that crime will increase, and therefore because of Destination Medical Center, they could fund their own judge. So I just wondered if you had heard any response to that or any...
I hadn't heard any response. That was kind of my, I don't know, you know, you hear, it's a great program for Rochester and the neighboring community, including Winona County, for economic development, but I don't think they really thought about the infrastructure and the services that would be needed to support
all of the
that.
court services,
right?
But the judge also, yeah.
And it's not really proposing that Destination Medical have its own judge. It's saying to the legislature, use some of that funding that you allocated to Destination Medical to help support the court system. And there is, obviously, every time there's a budget cycle, the Supreme Court will be asking for additional judicial seats depending on actually the weighted caseload. And that's one of the other concerns about this proposal. It really looks at the demographics, the speculative demographics. You know, not everybody might live in Olmsted County who goes to work there for Destination Medical. So the surrounding counties could actually have more people. And you know, if we lose a judge, then that puts even more pressure on Winona County. So
I'd like to see that idea get some traction, but yeah.
Me too. But
Any other questions?
I move to approve the resolution. Second.
Okay, we have a motion made by Commissioner Jacob, seconded by Commissioner Olson to approve the resolution. Any further discussion? I've got just a couple questions. When you on page 94, just the way it's stated, the first whereas the Minnesota Supreme Court is considering a request by the 3rd Judicial District. So when you say that, does that mean our 11 neighboring counties proposed this, or is this just the Supreme? Who voted against us? We need to know who our friends and enemies are here.
well,
Or was this just? Did you put it nicely?
no, and actually the 3rd Judicial District judges met in
Oh,
January.
The judges, okay, not the county attorneys.
Right, no. And that's why my letter went in January before that meeting asking that they vote, if you want to say, to recommend that the seat remain here. And actually the decision, as I understand, was up to the chief judge of the 3rd Judicial District, who is Judge Jody Williamson, who used to serve in Olmsted County and now is in Dodge. But the vote of the 24 judges in the 3rd Judicial District was a split vote, 12 and 12.
Oh,
And Judge Thompson didn't vote.
And Judge Thompson didn't vote. That's what my
Yes.
information has. So most of the judges that were not of all the Rochester judges apparently voted for.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a few non-Olmsted County judges supported that. So it's a split vote. And then when I said that the request, it's again, the third judicial district then, through the chief judge, made that recommendation to the Supreme Court, and that's upon that, then Justice Galdea issued that order asking for
And the way
public
we do
comment.
business, if it's a tie vote, it fails. So it's different. They operated under a different set of premises.
Was Judge Thompson eligible to vote?
Yeah, I believe he was, but because he was retiring, I think he felt that
okay.
he should abstain.
Okay. And then one other question, and I don't know, again, at this point in time, because it's going to be, the decision's going to be made very soon. But you talk about losing a judge and filling the gap by visiting and retired judges. And at the meeting the other day, there was talk of, a retired judge or another judge, they have to travel to another county. So are they paid time and mileage when they're commuting to these places? And would there be any significance to cost savings to keep one seated here versus having somebody? I don't know if that was part of the discussion or if it doesn't.
Well, I think well, let me answer your first question. Retired judges do get a per diem every day, so they can travel from wherever they are, residing to a courthouse. Visiting judges, I believe, I'm not sure if they get mileage, but that's part of their salary. And that's the equalization factor that's talked about in terms of making things work. And it's working well now, where Winona County and other counties are giving judge time to Olmsted. Mm-hmm. They travel up to Rochester and provide that.
Sure.
So, and I can't remember what the other one you asked about.
Counties are cognizant of windshield time, that it's not the most effective use of anybody's time, let alone a highly, respected judge to be driving, back and forth.
The judge and their sometimes the law clerk and also the court reporter. So they all come as a team.
Okay.
So.
Right. It was just a question. I didn't know if it would add up to any significant dollars or not, but it's not necessarily wise use of people's time.
No, nor wise use of justice.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. All right. So we have the motion to approve the resolution. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay, approved.
Thank you very much.
All right. And just if any members of the public still want to, they have until April 5th?
April
6th.
5th.
It has to be received.
It has to be received, but if they want to get something in, and it can be a handwritten letter, send it to my office and we'll file it for them. So just go on the county website and email it to me, and we'll get it in for people.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to 7.6, committee recommendations. Discuss organics composting study grant application.
Hello.
Good morning. Oh, evening.
Good
Sorry.
evening, Madam Chair, Commissioners. I'm here to ask you to take a look at a proposal that we have before you, and to say that it's taken a bit of a circuitous path in the sense that we were thinking that perhaps we would, at an earlier meeting, come with a proposal for a grant to do a composting facility, but as we spent time as staff looking through the details, it became clearer and clearer that we didn't have enough information to want to do a grant to do a composting facility. So earlier this month at the Parks and Environment Committee, we ended up bringing the information that we had to the committee and talked through it with Commissioner Jacob and others on the committee, and it was decided that it didn't make any sense to apply for a grant that we weren't sure would stand on its own after the grant was expired and not have tails that would cost someone something. And we were staff was relieved because we had felt that that was not really a good plan either. So that was on the 6th. On the 8th, a couple days later, it occurred to me that it might be a good idea to actually end up applying for a grant, not for the facility, but in fact to investigate further whether it would be economically feasible to do a composting facility in the region. So we didn't have a lot of time. In talking to administration, I made the pitch that maybe we could go ahead, write the grant, and the MPCA would allow us to submit it on time to meet their criteria, and I could take it to you after the fact. So we went ahead and submitted this in hopes that it would make sense to you too. So, I do. So I'm going to give you some background on why we ended up where we ended up. So I know you all are real familiar probably with the solid waste hierarchy in the state of Minnesota that prioritizes source reduction and reuse, followed by recycling and composting. And I would say that the source reduction and reuse is kind of a big challenge, but we do make strides and we do show forward progress. I would note that the Restore, Habitat for Humanity's Restore, was actually begun as a result of a grant that we wrote to the MPCA for a feasibility study. And now we have that and have had the benefit of that in the reduce and reuse sector. Recycling, we obviously have a really mature program that's functioning well. But we don't have anything in the way of composting, which is a piece that we think is important. In 2013, the state of Minnesota did a very representative waste composition study that showed that this is the waste stream that we're dealing with now, statewide. 25% of the material that goes into landfills from this area is paper, or across the state that goes into landfills. 18% is plastics, and the largest portion now at this point is organic material. I would say that I think ours is a little bit more even than that because I know for a fact we don't have 25% of our garbage as paper and plastics. We do better than that. This is, again, a statewide average.
That's material that does not get recycled?
Yeah, the waste composition study is what is going into the waste stream, into landfills. And that was a statewide average number, and ours is better than that. But that kind of probably means that organics is a bigger proportion of our waste stream than 31%. This is our comprehensive solid waste plan that was written. It's a 10-year plan completed in 2012. And we did identify food waste recycling, which is used interchangeably as composting, as a priority. We recognize that, and we believe that source-separated organics is really the way to go because then you can make good soil out of it and much benefit. I will say that this has been in our solid waste plan since 2012. But the way that it's worked better for us is that we kind of try to seize upon opportunities when they present themselves. It's pretty hard to go out there and beat the bushes on a project when you don't have other things working toward it. And as busy as we all are, we haven't really aggressively pursued that. But an opportunity clearly presented itself, so that's why we felt that it made lots of sense to investigate this option. And the proposal that we were looking at is a regional 3-county facility. There is just no access to food waste composting, organics composting in this whole region. Another reason why we felt like it was valuable to seize this opportunity is that we've got a number of businesses and schools that are they're not composting food waste now, they are sending their food waste to a Food to Hogs program out in East Burns Valley that's been operating for more than a decade. A number of them are concerned about the long-term longevity of that opportunity, and they're worried about what would happen when those folks maybe stop doing that program. And so they have called me, a number of those businesses, over the last 3, 4, 5 years to talk about is there any opportunity for a composting facility. And I've said no, but I'll certainly keep an eye open for opportunities like that.
I have a question, Ann. I've heard you say a couple times that we have no method to deal with this kind of compost. And then I heard you talk about the composting farm. So there has been a place where this has been going.
People make a distinction between the Food to Hogs program and composting. The difference is that Food to Hogs can only be certain kinds of food and not the compostable paper fraction, paper towels, those kinds of things that come out of institutions in large volumes. Those can go in a composting facility. They can't go to Food to Hogs.
Okay.
So it's different, not hugely different, but.
But we haven't been without any service. We've had that service available to us.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
It's private sector?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a number of the partners in the community, that a lot of them are higher ed institutions who have a lot of food waste, and when we send food waste to the landfills, we're paying a lot of taxes on it too, and so there's a real demand out there for some kind of composting facility if it makes sense. So the grant that is available from the MPCA is $250,000 for a project, and it doesn't require any direct cash match. It's just in-kind of staff support, which is not nothing, but it's definitely better than cash. So this, I mentioned that we took the initial proposal to the Parks and Environment Committee, and the clear message that we got was that we just didn't have enough data to want to move forward. So that's why it suddenly occurred to me that maybe it would make sense to get more data to see if, in fact, that is feasible.
So I have another question.
Yeah.
When the grant proposal came before the Parks and Environmental Committee, it was to attain a grant to develop this facility. And so is this the same grant now that you'd apply for the same grant and instead of being used for developing a facility, now it would be used just to study a facility?
Yes, exactly. So that once that work is done, if we were to get the grant, then we could decide if that made sense. So we would use the grant money to hire several consultants to study similar operations in the state, look at their economics, and then spend some more time looking at operational costs and market demand, basically the value of the finished compost. I had been told by very credible individuals that there'd be no problem, that material could be sold, but it was me relying on some opinions that I didn't think were well-founded enough to want to make a big decision on. So,
if the material that was generated, the end product at this facility, it would require the county to kind of become a business to package that and market it and sell it, or how would it be handled?
Yeah, we were looking rather like a model, almost like the recycling program, where, I mean, this is what I would imagine if the economics looked good, that we would actually just offer the site, perhaps, if the site that we were looking at up at Stone Point made sense. Maybe we could offer the site and support the project, but it would be operated by a business in the private sector. And the county would only have oversight, if you will, somewhat.
Quite a bit. It's taken quite a turn from what it had when it came to our Parks and Environmental Committee on March 8th.
Yeah, very much so.
Okay, because at that point you were talking about county employees building a cement pad, having a leachate tank, buying equipment to turn the equipment. It was at that point it was Winona County would be to compost what Hardards is to recycling, right? That's what was proposed at.
Oh, sure.
Madam Chairman. Yes. Kate Wally. The meeting, and staff, I just wanted to insert one quick comment. At the Parks and Environment Committee, what staff brought forward was information to sort of set the table with compostable silverware at that, to get a site that's currently unused as a potential inside the fence at Stone Point that can't really be used for anything else, to use grant funds to get a pad and just the raw pieces together to then put out an RFP for a vendor to run, much like our Hardards runs our recycling, to run a composting facility that could accept the paper, the food, all of it, perhaps from a 3-county area. But it was impossible to get enough good data on the kind of sizing that and the volumes that could be generated without doing the survey work and a lot of other things. But at no time did that proposal or this proposal intend to make the county into the processor of the product. This would be something for the private sector to do. But without the investigation of what's working in the private sector, to be able to take the time to do that survey work, to maybe have the 2 different consultants, and have a site ready to go out on a bid, to make sure that contractors are willing to bid on it, that it has the kind of profile that will work. So I don't want to usurp the rest of your presentation, but that was the reason for morphing it, and still hoping to get the information needed so that we could bring additional data to you folks as the decision makers. So sorry for jumping in.
No problem. And I would say that we did talk about the county getting the equipment and the building and things like that, but
Even staff to run the Bobcat, that was discussed at the meeting.
The staff that would be doing that would be vendor staff, not county staff.
and we did talk about student interns from the technical college that were willing to collaborate with.
Because it was talked about that we needed 400,000 and we were short. This was only
Right.
50,000.
Yeah.
Part of that was the staff or the interns or whoever you were going to get to run this equipment.
Yeah. Right. Yep. Yes. So this is vastly different. It's kind of a major step backwards. Back before we try to go forward, before it would make sense to go forward. So, so we felt like it would be worth looking deeper into this. So that's actually, I think, the end of what I wanted to say. If you have questions about the information in the request for board action.
Questions? Well, I can start off. Usually the chair does it, but I'll start off. You mentioned three county region. I have never been questioned by any of my neighboring counties to engage in any kind of activity like this. So do you have willing partnerships from the other counties?
We have talked to staff, and they have expressed an interest in pursuing it. And in Houston County, the solid waste administrator did work with the public schools in their county to get student counts to identify the volumes that might come out of the schools. The schools are a really big target composting operations, because it's a lot of tax dollars to, throw the food away. And
Sounds like kids need to be taught, like I was, and I still do, is eat leftovers, eat leftovers. It sounds like there's too much being produced or prepared, and they're not consuming it. And I'm sorry, I just, to spend $250,000 of taxpayer dollars, this is not free money, this just comes out of another pot, to study this, when I really think it just should be a private, I think government should stay out of it. I think they should, that the private sector should, if it makes sense, they should be able to do it. And then the other thing of even thinking of taking Stone Point Park, wait a minute. That park has a plan. And if you read the plan, yes, it does say a compost facility, but if you read the plan, it says 0.25 acres for a pad and a small compost thing. What I think is being envisioned here, if we're going to be a 3-county drop site, the city, they're going to bring trees and everything, it's much more than a 0.25, and we plan to have that park as a beautiful vista, hiking trails, recreation facility, and to put this kind of operation up there, you're not following the plan that I think, Ann, you were instrumental in putting there. And you're reading about these little things. I mean, you have vector control in these nuisance, you got air monitoring, you got, heaven forbid, nitrates being produced, and you got the greater Mississippi River just down the hill, which is, I think, a major waters of the state that we need to protect. So to even think that we would entertain putting something of this size up there is just totally wrong, in my opinion. Interesting today, though, I personally traveled to La Crosse, Wisconsin, and there's a company down there, Seven Rivers Recycling, which you may be aware of or not. They're recycling mattresses and making very interesting mats out of them. I hope to use them in my garden to be weed control. So there's a lot of things going on, and I don't know if that's government or what it is. But, I am a recycler. I am a conservative in wasting things in life. But, boy, and the process. Now, you did explain your timeline and everything. And I did talk to somebody, Jenny Gibbon at MPCA, and this thing came out, kind of a short time frame. It came out in January, and then the deadline was, March something or other here. And I asked her, why is it just the governments that can get this money to study it if it really should be if we're looking at a model similar to our blue bins where we got a private contract? Why is it just public political entities that can reach? It shouldn't be. It should be anybody that wants to get into this business should have access to these research dollars. I mean, that was a little disturbing to me too, that why they always think government has to have our fingers in this stuff when we've had a very successful relationship with our blue bins being a private contracting business. And the ag plastics. That's private entity doing it and apparently doing it profitably so that they're here. So I really have some issues with this project moving forward. Commissioner Kavesi.
Thank you, Commissioner Ward. I just had a couple questions. Do you have a site identified within Stone Point Gardens?
Yeah, the site that we did look at and thought was quite feasible was actually where the old landfill used to be, and when the landfill was dug up and moved on to a lined cell. So that's a very flat area behind the fence, right next to the, just, I would say, east of the landfill. So it's not in a public area. It's kind of visibly quite separate. And there is a lot of regulation associated with any kind of contact water that comes off a composting facility, where it has to be captured if there's runoff, and then it actually goes to a sewage treatment plant. The regulations are quite significant. So the worry about maybe the Mississippi, I think, might be, taken care of in that way.
To add, if I could, Commissioner Gessie, we've always been told you can't touch that part that's fenced in. That's always been preached to us, that's off limits. So how did it all of a sudden become a possible feasible site? I mean, we've always been told you can't touch what's fenced in.
Thank you.
What changed? Are you just making assumptions?
No, we actually talked to staff about the possibility of doing it, and they...
MPCA staff?
Yeah, the folks that are responsible for the closed landfill area.
There's been
yeah.
a change in attitude then, because we've always, I think even yourself has said, we can't touch that.
Right.
One quick note.
Similar.
Ross Dunsmore, our supervisor in environmental services, also did some background work for this, Madam Chair and Commissioner, and stated that this facility would be allowed inside the fence. So it would neither affect the future working plan of Stone Point as a future park should funding become available for that use. And because of the vapor barrier work in the one building that's the closest to the landfill, for a person from a private company that would run this facility in future through the RFP I talked about earlier, they could be inside that building with some modifications. So if the grant were approved by the board, it wouldn't just be for a lot of theoretical study. It would be for what the building would require for minor modifications for someone, maybe a sliding window, bathroom or not bathroom, and actual site plans that we, or a vendor could go out and build. So you've got something that's sort of shovel ready at the end of it, not just a study that we set on a shelf. So anyway.
Commissioner Kavesi.
Okay. I have some other questions. I see on page 104 that the grant requested is $93,000 and the matching funds in kind are $32,000 and the total project cost is $125,000, not $250,000.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the upper limit of the grant.
Right. So we're really only applying for $93,000 out of that. The other thing is that, if I understand it, this is a preliminary grant to developing a facility. This is the study that's being done so that a company, a private vendor, can come in and bid and know with some reliability that there's economics, there's environmental, controls or whatever, that it could work with these facts being known. And that's what we don't know now, which is why we couldn't say that we were ready to do a facility on our own. Okay. That's my assumption?
That is true.
Okay.
Yes.
I have one other question then. I know that if people are currently putting their organic waste into the solid waste stream, that increases the weight of their garbage, which obviously increases the prices of their services with the private vendors that collect garbage.
Right.
Okay,
Yep.
So if we can remove that organic waste from that solid waste stream, people's garbage bills should be cheaper?
Yes. Yes, they like to do it by volume typically, but I will say that certainly in the commercial sector, the universities, the large food businesses, they pay by volume and weight, so it's significant for them. Not so much in households. I mean, if you want to go down to the 35, you can, but you could probably save like $3 a month.
But that's how we got our letters of support. In addition to, wanting to go forward with such a study, they realize that there's cost savings from the bigger institutions.
Right. Yeah. And that's why they've been, Chartwells has been calling and saying we're a little worried about the long-term outlook for our existing Food to Hogs program. And I will say,
and at the end, there will be a product which people can
Right.
use in their gardens.
right, yeah. I will say that one of the reason why this came to the fore for me was last fall when we were trying to figure out how to manage all of the Oriental bittersweet vines and the hemlock, which, we're not supposed to put organic material into the garbage, and the answer that I got about what we should do with it is like, well, compost it. And I said, well, really, rural Minnesota doesn't really have any opportunity to compost, even if you really wanted to and went out of your way. So, yes, thank you for mentioning that it was just the 90,000. Part of it is to work on finding out how much volume is out there so that a private contractor can come in and say, I can make this work if I have this much organic fraction or, nitrogen fraction, and then the wood chips from trees and leaves, which you have to have by a ratio of at least 2 to 3 to 1 for the nitrogen, high nitrogen food portion. That's actually kind of a problem too, but it would be really useful and beneficial in an organics operation. So, yeah.
I move that we,
Okay. Yes, okay.
Commissioner.
I had a couple questions, Ann. So in the introductory work, we're talking about a $250,000 grant.
Right.
But as we go through all the budget materials, it's with our match and with the state's match, it's a $125,000 grant.
Right. The 90 and then the 34.
I understand why that is that way. Why were we referring to it as a $250,000 grant in the first place?
You know,
Max,
really,
that's the max you could apply for.
but I put that in the RFBA, and that's really great. That was a mistake on my part because I had been for months talking about a $250,000 grant, and it was a quick transition at the last minute to this feasibility study, and I didn't catch that.
Okay, so having listened tonight, I guess what I'm gathering is this. Around the 8th, when you presented the plan to Parks and Environmental for an actual facility and such, you kind of came to the conclusion that it's way, way too early to even think about that. And so at that moment, you thought, well, let's try something different. And I mean, it's probably only a couple of weeks since you had that initial meeting and you're working on this grant now and looking for approval on it. I'm not sure I'm seeing everything I need to see. I mean, initially what I'd like to see up front is some sort of indication of interest in or partnering with the other two counties that we're talking about. Because if we find that it's beneficial, but there's going to be some sort of necessary offset, you wouldn't expect Winona County to provide that for itself and for two other counties. Those types of things. And not that they need to be contractual at this time, but simply, I know that you've mentioned that, well, you've talked to their staffs, but their staffs can't approve agreements. Their staff can provide information and suggest that their boards might go for it, but I don't know, I tend to be the kind of person that likes to see those things nailed down a little more.
is that part of the proposed grant study? Is that one of the questions the study would?
Yes, there's no, that's what that grant consultant would do, is approach those counties, find out if they're interested, so that the package could be put together.
And that's where I'm coming to with all of this. It seems to me as though we haven't really done the legwork that we need to do to provide some idea of what this project's really all about. Because we're talking about, well, we'll see, maybe they will, maybe they won't. And I mean, if you're going to go headlong into something like this, I'd really like to see there be a little more collaboration on it and a little more harmony with some form of, yes, well, we three counties are interested in pursuing, this study, and it may lead to a potential site, and we commit to this, that, and the other thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Olson.
We already, of course, are working with the counties on household hazardous waste, and we have partnership agreements through the Environmental Services Department at this time. So there is kind of a natural extension to this working relationship.
But you're on a whole different scale here when you're hauling stuff from, yeah.
Can I follow up on that?
Yes.
I guess what I'm looking at is Winona County seems to have some of the establishments that would provide a greater deal of volume, perhaps, to this endeavor with our universities and such. But the other thing too is that I personally have not heard of compost sites that are making money. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I know that if I recall about 8 or 9 years ago, we were kind of looking at this and it seemed like, maybe it's best to stay away from it that time.
We did an internal with a Green Corps member, a feasibility study, and that was mostly just in terms of collecting the volumes.
Okay, but the thing I'm getting at is if we're going to do this as a regional thing, we should do it all collectively, right from the get-go. Right from the get-go, and not wonder if, we're going to have to bargain later on or negotiate later on if there's a subsidy required for it. Well, all of a sudden, maybe 3 counties is 2 or 1. See where I'm coming from a little bit?
Madam Chairman and Commissioner, just one quick aside. What Ann mentioned about finding out this information and doing the outreach as part of the staff time, as part of the match. Because we had so many committed partners internally in the county, doesn't mean we weren't planning to do our due diligence with the other counties, building on the relationship that we already have with HHW. But our conversation with Harder's, our private sector provider that won the RFP for our recycling contract, was one of the deciding factors. Because basically what he said on the telephone to the 2 of us in a conference call when we called to say, look, is this going to make sense for private industry to run something like this profitably? He said, absolutely. I believe that it would be a valuable addition to my business should I win an RFP for local counties. He said, I'm taking a certain amount to the site that was mentioned earlier that is in La Crosse County, but that he would be happy to add this as part of either a route or a pickup in distinct locations if they were identified through this work. If a site could be made available in the 3-county area, that would make sense, that it would be something he was interested in.
Is he interested in transporting it, or is he interested in operating a compost site?
Both. We asked him that question. Now, I said, you are just one individual engaged in this industry who happens to have our recycling contract, but is a valued partner and the current holder of our recycling contract, and somebody whose facilities we've toured. We wanted to get your input before we did any kind of moving forward with it too. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that too.
Commissioner Olson.
So, Ann, this is very time sensitive to apply for this. I mean, it's past due, it looks like.
Yeah.
But it's still, so there's possibility you wouldn't get a grant.
There's a possibility if you wanted to move forward that we could get the grant, yes.
Okay. And a lot of the questions I hear my fellow commissioners ask would be answered by the feasibility study. And it might turn out that it's not feasible. Once you do the study, it might just, you might find out that, as Commissioner Pomeroy said, stay away. It's not feasible. It's
absolutely true. And honestly, I was hoping to kind of go further with the other 2 counties, but I just didn't really have the time. We're busy, and so it's really, if we're going to try to see if it's possible, it's really got to come from some consultants because we just don't really have that staff time.
Personally, I see no harm in finding out if it's feasible. I do understand the pushback you're getting, but I think those questions or hesitation would be better answered if we had the facts in front of us. So.
Commissioner Jacob.
Do you have a model of other counties that are doing something similar that's working out good for them?
There are about 4 around the state. They're all really quite different and organized based on the resources in those locations. So
Can I ask, are they mix of rural, metro, like Winona County, or are they all metro, are they all rural? What kind of counties are they? The ones that have them?
one is outside Blue Earth County, Good Thunder, and that's operating successfully. I think that's kind of similar to us, but it was really hard to pull an apples to apples comparison because of all of
the other 3 counties. What are they?
There's a county up north, that I haven't traveled to. It was suggested that I would do that, but haven't. And then there are a number of them in the Twin Cities. So I know of two. There's one down by Madison that I think we should look at that's working well, that someone referred me to too. So I think the reason that the state wants to invest some money in researching it is because food waste just isn't a natural fit in a landfill or an incinerator. It seems like a waste of resources, and it's complicated. And so we don't want to go into it without our eyes wide open, and this would be a way to see if it's feasible. And I don't know if we would get this grant if you thought it was a good idea to make an application, but.
So of the 4 counties, 2 of them are metro counties that have a system. And is your vision that everyone in the county would have a separate composting bin, something like what they have with the food bins now, or how would that work?
The way that the discussions that I've had to date are the city is looking at maybe some, trying to do some curbside grass clippings collection. They're investigating that, and if they did that, people could put their food waste into that, but that's only 6-7 months out of the year. And other than that, the way that I would propose to do it is like a subscription service where people can opt in. That's how they do it in Mankato, is people sign up for it. So it's not something that we have to pay for everybody to get. It's something that people opt into. And then on the commercial side, where the real volumes are, that's the relationship between the contractor who operates the facility. So the way that would only make sense that I would want to actually propose it is if we had a limited role in it, and then it's operated by the private sector, other than maybe providing the location and assistance with growing the volumes that come in by education.
So my sense would be that if you had an entirely metro county, this would make more sense. As rural people, I haven't had a single constituent ask me, what can I do with my banana peels? In the rural area, we got, put them on the field, give them to hogs. Yeah. It's not an issue. One of my concerns is that we're trying to kind of steer and determine how a business is going to develop and where it's going to go. I could see this being one company that deals with mulch, wood chippings, leaves. I could see another company dealing with food for hogs. And I don't see it necessarily all being everything that doesn't fit into one of your other categories on the screen that you put up that had which percentage of what in the recycling stream goes where. I think you got 31% left. 10% of it might be a good fit one place, 10% of it might be a good fit another. And by interfering with this, I think we could be stifling the private sector from letting this blossom and grow, however that might be. We've already got food to hogs going. And if I were a recycler like Hardert's, chances are I think I would want my own facility where it's the best place for me, not where Winona County happens to have land that they could use. So I kind of think we're sending, by accepting the grant, we're signifying to the citizenry that this is an expansion of government. We're going to possibly compete with private industry. All of it is hard for me to support.
Commissioner Kavesi.
Yeah, I just had a couple more questions. A lot of the discussion that we have raised, I think, are the issues that would be dealt with in the study, which would then determine whether or not it's feasible to allow, to have companies put out bids for this program. Whether it's regional or not, isn't that one of the issues that the study would address? Is it feasible for Winona County alone? Is it twice as feasible if two other counties join us. And so again, even that question of what kind, is it regional or is it Winona County, would be answered by the study. Is that?
That is true.
That's my assumption.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I wanted to clarify, because, again, I think a lot of the discussion points that we raised are the kinds of questions that we have, obviously, and that should be answered through this kind of a feasibility study, and then allow private business to enter. Private business right now is probably not going to go to the extent of doing this kind of feasibility study.
That's true. That's what Gary Harder had to say was, he's had it in the back of his mind, but it's a big step, and there's a lot to study before he would feel comfortable making a move. So,
yeah, so just like we provided a service to research the feasibility of the Restore operation, which is very successful.
Yep.
But Habitat for Humanity would not have been able to do that kind of research. But
Right.
they are very able to run the program and to do it successfully and to generate funds for their own organization. So I see this as the same thing.
that was kind of a nice one where that push really helped.
Commissioner Plummer.
I have had some concerns about this and how it's developed. I think it's developed over a very short period of time that maybe would have required a little more thought and stuff going into it. But I know that we've tried to look at composting before, and I know it's been an issue for business. And so to answer the questions once and for all, I'll support it, although that's not an endorsement of a compost site, because I have real reservations about whether that would be feasible or not. But I think it is time to answer it once and for all. And with the grant, we're putting staff time into it and not a lot of dollars, so.
Commissioner Olson.
I'm going to support it, but I'm not necessarily supporting the county involvement in even the site, but I think it needs to be, it's a good way to answer the question, so I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Palmer, second by Commissioner Olson. Kavesi, I'm sorry, to approve the grant application for the discussion. I just want to note it, if I added it up right, though, we're spending a lot of taxpayer dollars to study this. So we're getting a grant, we're applying for a grant, but we've got a match of almost $36,000 in the next through
in kind, yeah.
April 29th. Well, it's wages. It's it's not.
I see 32.9.
I added
If it isn't interns, because we're aggressively working on interns to satisfy a lot of in-kind time, and we have been successful with that a couple of other projects.
Okay, but so it's not, so again, it's, first of all, MPCA is taxpayer dollars, so I'm really offended that my legislators, again, put municipalities, cities, counties, townships getting this money versus supporting private industry to do this research. Because, I don't know, having owned a private business, I didn't depend on government to tell me how to make money. I figured it out myself. And I think most entrepreneurs and people that want to do this, if Mr. Gallion, the hog, is aging out, he's retiring, I think we should be aggressively working with the EDA and some type of entrepreneur program to make that grow, if that's a viable solution. Another thing, to not know, as Commissioner Palmer said, to not know if our partners in Houston County and Fillmore County, I know a lot of those commissioners, and I can almost hear the conversation now, because this is not going to be an inexpensive endeavor, because you're going to haul this stuff. Fillmore and Houston, it's a long way away. And so if you have to haul this stuff, any good recycler will tell you, if you have to haul it very far, you can't make money on it. So I'm just offended that we spend this kind of money, taxpayer dollars, to, quote, study. Something that I personally feel the private sector should handle it.
Madam Chair, could I just mention a couple things? About 40% of the in-kind match is actually volunteer hours from community members. So that.
From the Parks and Environment Committee?
No, from the university, from the technical college, from.
I'm sorry, they're paid staff. I mean, they've got jobs at the university. They have jobs. So, I mean, they're paid.
Yeah.
That's part of their job. So
Winona is a volunteer organization.
It's not real free. I mean.
And the other thing that I will.
They're paid to go to meetings.
The other thing I will say about the existing Food to Hogs is it's not a very viable return on investment. The marginal return is very small, and it's not profitable in the typical sense.
But maybe we could work on it, because that's particularly sustainable farming. They have a passion to do it, and they live on little or no profit. It's a passion. It's a lifestyle. Commissioner, I think Commissioner Jacob had his light on.
So I think still one of the concerns I have is through this motion, we're approving spending more than 90,000. What's the end number?
90, well,
I saw 93,000. That's what I saw.
Okay.
the total budget is 125.9.
Right.
On page
That's the full
110.
with the match in them.
$125,900 of taxpayers' dollars just to look at whether this is something we want to do. It seems to me this board should make the decision first, is this what we want to do? And then vote to apply for the grant and spend, because some other county, we're depriving somebody else of, maybe they've got a good fit for this. We haven't really decided whether this is what we want to do. We haven't had a discussion at the board level whether we want to get into this business. We haven't decided whether private sector could serve the community. There's a lot of decisions we haven't made. It just seems premature. And maybe putting the cart before the horse for us to spend this money prior to us deciding what our vision is, what our path is, where we're trying to go. And I'm frustrated that it's changed so much from what was presented on March 8th to the Parks and Environmental Committee to now. It just seems like we got to come up with some reason to justify applying for this money. And so we've come up with an entirely different, this didn't come before the Parks and Environmental Committee. It hasn't come before this board until now. It's not a discussion that we've had. So, I think those are frustrations to me. And then also back to the ag plastic recycling. That is a real success story, and the true person we should be thanking is John Bronk. I don't know how many times he asked to have that put back on the Parks and Environmental Committee's agenda. And bottom line is, private sector solved that problem for us. They sought us out. We didn't find that company, and they provided the dumpsters. They provided the bags. All we had to do was give them the names of our farmers. They did everything else. So I just feel like we're maybe prematurely interfering with how things could go. And once we spend money, then we should feel obligated to make something work out of that, or else we're just spending taxpayers' dollars. I'd like to, can I make it, is a motion to table this still appropriate with another motion on the table?
I believe we have to vote on the motion that's on the table to approve applying. But that's not a true statement because it's already been submitted, correct? We've already applied?
We've applied, but we can,
Okay, but it's not, we've already applied, so we're after the fact.
If the board does not approve it tonight, then we would withdraw the
Right.
application.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have the motion. I think Commissioner Kavesi was trying to call the question.
It just seems like we're ready.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
We got three? Okay. Opposed? Nay? Aye. Okay. Passes 3-2. All right. Submit it.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. That was the last item on our business. Okay, so for a future meeting, to avoid just what we went through, I firmly think Winona County needs a process to evaluate this applying for grants. And we need to be consistent. We need some kind of check sheet of, questions we need answered before these kinds of things get to us and we get put in the second seat. So I think we need a work session to have a grant application process. And I would.
Yeah, I'd second that. I think that's a good idea.
Okay, so Mr. Fritz, some
No
working
problem.
session or something to, and,
Got it.
okay.
Could I
thank
make
you.
one brief comment about what we
Yes.
just did?
Yes.
Typically, an item like that should have probably come to the committee of the board before it ever came to the board. And I think that's the kind of thing that you're talking about
Yes.
doing within the process that you're suggesting.
I think that was, the applications for that were open already in January.
Yes.
And so.
Well, it went to the park, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it went to the Parks Committee, and that was the idea that would go to the Parks Committee, then come to the county board should the Parks Committee decide to make the recommendation. But then at the Parks Committee, right before that, or around that time, Ann and Kate realized that it wasn't feasible in the form that they wanted to bring it. So the Parks Committee decided not to forward it to the board. But then they had the idea to change it, but then the deadline was looming. So they had to file for the deadline. If you had waited for a committee of the board, you would be past the deadline.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is if it was, yeah, if it was
Well, no,
open.
it could have, yeah, no, that's the way it
Initially
happened.
concept.
But if you went back to January and started then, that would be different.
These should have
Absolutely.
been
Absolutely.
October, November, December 2017 discussions at the Parks and Environmental Committee to come to the county board in January to decide whether this was.
Not sure if the MPCA was, if she had information then that it was going to come up in January, but I understand what you're saying, and even when they got the news in January, if we could have brought it up as a subject.
Yes.
Before.
There still was adequate.
There was time, yeah, then there was time, yeah, and so that's, I understand that's what you want to kind of work toward, and then a checklist to kind of figure out how to approach these, so that makes sense.
Your request is timely.
Yes. It's been a frustration of mine for a long time. All right, any other business to be brought before the Winona County Board? Not entertain a motion to adjourn. Commissioner? Motion to adjourn by Commissioner Olson, second by Commissioner Kavesi. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. We are adjourned. Good night.